Today on Terp Trends, I'm sitting down with Johnny Casali of Huckleberry Hill Farms, a living legend of legacy cannabis. Johnny's roots run deep in Southern Humboldt, where he grew up tending plants long before legalization, learning firsthand the beauty and the risks of living dedicated to this plant. Through the hardest days of prohibition, he never turned his back on the craft or the community that raised him. His love for the land and the culture shines through in everything he touches, especially in his legendary strain, White Thorn Rose, a flower born from family, history, and hope. From winning Cannabis Cup awards to opening Huckleberry Hill Farms as a training ground for the Ganjier program, Johnny's journey is more than survival. It's about honoring the spirit of cannabis and building a future that stays true to its roots. This conversation is packed with passion, wisdom, and the kind of energy you only find when someone has lived every chapter of the story they tell. This is Terp Trends. Let's dive in.
Hey, thanks, Adam, and thanks for having me on today. Excited to share a little bit about what we're doing here on the farm, and hopefully your guests kind of like what we have to say.
I think every single one of my guests will love anything you have to say, my man. I thank you for taking your time out. I know you're getting some sunshine, and that's important, so I just want to applaud you again for taking that time.
No, cool, my pleasure for sure, and big shout out to Rose for actually making the connection.
Yeah.
As she sits here, kind of listening in on our episode. Anyway, she said, Adam's the man. You better jump on this one. So we pick and choose kind of because it's just Rose and I that run the farm, and so we have a kind of a limited amount of time. And so when Rose gave the green light for Adam and Terp Trends, that she said, "You got it. This is a must." So I'm glad to
Oh,
be
man.
here and glad to share our story.
Yeah, man. So, Johnny, I've been diving into you, but for those that may not know, can you just give us a little bit about yourself and Huckleberry Farms?
Yeah, that question is. I'm smiling because it's been a long journey for myself and now for Rose. I'm sitting in the living room of the same very house that I grew up in over 50 years ago, and
Wow.
really doing the same exact thing that I was doing 50 years ago, just on the traditional market. Um, and that journey in itself, if your listeners don't understand, for a lot of us Emerald Triangle small farmers that made their livelihood kind of revolved around cannabis and enforcement and the illegalities of growing cannabis and the consequences of that, has been a long journey to the regulated market, to legalization. And most of my friends and myself, we're part of that journey. And it's I'll never be able to do it justice by sharing with your listeners, what it was like growing up here in Humboldt County or the Emerald Triangle. But man, it was it was an incredible way of life for a kid and my family. But it was also kind of a different way of life than most people that live in the city that have a 9 to 5 job. We moved here with my mom and my stepdad when I was 5 years old and started growing cannabis just as and this was in the late, mid 70s. This was just part of our income that allowed us to kind of create a lifestyle of our own. We also were commercial fishermen. We were part-time loggers. We grew cannabis. We had a small nursery, and cannabis was just a small part of our income that allowed us to make enough money to get to the next year, right? It was never for us and many of my friends about getting rich. It was about having the ability to live in the country, create a lifestyle of your own, um, and be happy, right? That was the goal, is to be happy. And
Yeah,
really,
man.
to this day, I try to keep everything in perspective and try to remember the ultimate goal. And Rose is over there laughing because I kind of get caught up in the hoopla of now this regulated industry that we're participating in, and it becomes a faster way of life, right? Regulation requires, things to do for the water board, fish and wildlife, the county, the state, and all of a sudden to participate in what we've been doing for a whole life requires a lot more energy, a lot more time. And so it's trying to figure out if this is really our pathway forward and if this is really what we like. But, like I said, growing up was an incredible way of life. Learned how to grow cannabis and all kinds of plants, the vegetable garden from my mom from the age of 10. And really just grateful and really appreciative that I grew up that way and that now I'm sitting here in the same house I grew up in and doing the same thing. It's not many people can say they've been doing the same thing for 50 years. And I'm not saying I'm the best at what we do, but you do the same thing for a long time and you start to learn by your mistakes, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so that was a long rant. Sorry.
No, man, that was a perfect rant, and I think you have the awards behind you now to state the quality of what you do. That speaks for your craftsmanship, especially the strains behind it as well. So I think that's awesome. So
Yeah.
at what point did you pivot? And yeah, exactly. At
Sorry.
what point
I,
did you pivot to realize that you kind of wanted a career in cannabis? Because, like you said, your family grew up in all these different trades, right? And I read that you had this connection with your mother and cultivation, and how next to the tomato plants you were just learning about cannabis. So it was in your everyday life, man. So what made you kind of make that pursuit to go full in cannabis then?
Yeah, it was a actually it was ended up being an easy decision, but it was a decision between two things that I really truly loved, and that was fishing. And not only were we part-time commercial fishermen, where we fished for salmon, we fished in the ocean commercially. We also fished for albacore. We also did crabbing. Um,
Nice.
but my true love was fishing on the river, and I have a local river that flows through our town called the Eel River, and it really inhabits silver salmon, king salmon, and also steelhead. So when I was 16 years old, I was a guide on the river and really fell in love with watching people catch their first steelhead ever. And talking about first, not only was that exciting for me to watch them catch their first fish, but with cannabis, watching people and for me growing my own was kind of a similar feeling with that, like watching people catch their first fish. That plant really relied on me or my mother throughout its lifestyle to start to seed, to nurture it throughout its lifestyle, to harvest it, to cure it, to dry it, to trim it, to then share it with some of your friends was really something special, something that I really encourage everybody to do, especially like your listeners and your first time growers. I mean, the true magic of this cannabis plant that hooked me from the very beginning was about growing your own. And it's hard to share what that feels like until you do it. And you can at the end of the year after you're done doing that and you look over towards your buddy who you might have shared something that you created and you see them laughing or smiling and know that you're directly responsible for that joy that you're bringing them. That's the true magic of growing your own, and that's what I want people to experience and I want them to feel, because that's what makes me do what I do today. That's the excitement I get, and it's not about the money for us. It has nothing to do about that. And I know it's hard for people to understand that, but growing up in the country, one of the more um, the one of the things that we always used to say, and one of our kind of things that we believed in, it's never going to be about one of us, and it's always going to be about all of us. And I say that a lot because this was a community that really, excuse me, really relied on one another with their lives, and if one of us wasn't okay, that wasn't okay with any of us. And we always reached out and tried to help however it could, whether or not it was bringing them firewood or giving them food or helping them financially if that was the situation. And it was an amazing place to grow up because of that. You felt very safe because of the community that was around us.
Yeah. Yeah, what I think a term that I think encompasses the cannabis culture is unity. And I don't think there's
Yep.
any better definition of love than unity itself, right? And I feel when we hear the tales of North Cal and everything, it really just states back to community. And when cannabis gets funneled out of these states, I feel like that essence slowly loses it because when you reach it all the way to PA, like we have a really special community, but it's not like the tales of what you're saying here. And maybe that's what the legalization and everything like that we'll see when we progress. But I love hearing that tale right there because that's truly what cannabis is about. It's about the community of the plant. So did you always envision yourself in cultivation, or did you ever branch out into other avenues in the cannabis space as well?
Um, you know, for me, it's always been about cultivation. We just over the last couple years decided to, we got our nursery license here, so we're able to really um, start to produce seeds and share our genetics, which has been really fun because now, like I described before, I get to share those genetics that I created kind of through my mom, share her story, which is really, in my opinion, her legacy of how she got to be known as one of the best growers in Humboldt, and really resonate with the consumer or the home grower. That is really the most fun with for us. So as far as our product has changed from most of it going to flower form to now working with manufacturers or distributors that have the same value as we do and sharing that with the consumer. But that now has changed from flower form a little bit to evolving into like rosin or hash or into vape pens, and I don't know that kind of language that well because it's kind of newer for us over the last 4 or 5 years, and didn't even really know that a lot of the cultivars that we were growing here were were really ideal for like hash making. And so
Yeah.
through some of these manufacturers, really, they were the ones that alerted me to, wow, this White Thorn Rose or this Mom's Weed or Riddles or whatever strain it was. Wow, these are amazing yielders. With the hash world, you kind of need to check about, three different points. It has to kind of have the terpene profile. It has to have it has to have the yield profile and whatever the other one was. But if it doesn't check all the boxes, it really maybe doesn't make the cut in today's, hash market. And White Thorn Rose really checks all the boxes. And what's I think really special and unique and has become the pathway forward for many small farmers, especially our farm, is it's a strain that kind of was, that I developed from what we grew up doing, right? Through a strain I used to grow with my mom, Paradise Punch, I bred this White Thorn Rose. And really it's unique to our farm. And it's we're able to say this is the only place you can find it in the world. So instead of competing with the glass houses or these big giant corporations growing these commercialized strains that everybody has, now we've been able to shine the light on these legacy genetics that I believe are pretty special and really have gotten a lot of momentum. And it's really given us the ability to survive the oversaturation of the California marketplace. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Just the saturation in all these flower markets is kind of insane, and and just the country wide cannabis scene, legal and
yeah.
non, So developing a strain that puts such a flag in the term legacy, what was that like developing that, and can you even take us into the background of like sourcing that because it came from a different strain? So what's it like going through these cultivars and then sticking one that's so legendary now?
I definitely won't ever begin to take credit for getting really super lucky. And it was maybe if I take any credit, it's the belief in what we had was really special. So when I decided to go legal, and I don't know how much you want to get into my backstory, but
Oh, all of it,
every
man.
everybody has bumps in the roads, and so I won't. I mean, I could talk for a week on it, but growing up and doing what I loved. Really came with a little bit of risk at the beginning because we were such small growers. But as time went on, as we went from the 70s into the 80s, and really Ronald Reagan declared the war on drugs, um, enforcement started to get worse for the Emerald Triangle small farmers, and they started to give federal monies to eradicate weed, and that looked like helicopters and airplanes doing aerial surveillance of rural properties out in the hills. And as they, found cannabis growing on open fields, right? Um,
Yeah.
they would drop guys down on wires from the helicopters with AR-15s, and they would cut down the weed, and then they would load it up onto nets and take it to the local con camp, and they would burn these, big gardens that they would find out in the woods. And most of the time, you would never get arrested for it. It's in an open field. Anybody could have planted it there. It was kind of a loophole in the law that you could skirt around, right? And so
Yeah.
you never really grew within the curtilage of your home. So just in your everyday use place, it was always outside of the curtilage. And as long as you didn't get caught growing weed in the garden, you were okay. And they really had no intent in trying to actually catch anybody until really later in the years, like the late 80s. Ronald Reagan really put a lot of pressure with this war on drugs and the mandatory minimums. And having grown up here in the hills, we were kind of really, to be blunt, naive about the outside world and what the rules and regulations were. And we were just growing a plant. And, that plant to me represented the same as a tomato plant did. That's how I grew up. And
Yep.
it's hard for people to understand, but, it's just another plant. And,
This episode is brought to you by Waddle, the world's fastest and easiest way to review and track your medicinal cannabis products. Waddle offers batch-specific reviews, so you'll know what to stash or what to trash. It's exclusively available for Pennsylvania medical cannabis patients. Waddle helps you take the guesswork out of your cannabis journey and ensures transparency with the verified product tracking. Download Waddle now on iOS or Android, that's WODL, and take control of your cannabis experience today.
I was taught that it had a lot of medicinal values for people. And yeah, we did make a little bit of money from that plant, but it wasn't a main source of our income. We were one of the smallest growers around. It wasn't like anything like we ever felt like we were hurting anybody. Long story short, um, in 1992, I was 24 then. My parents had, because of enforcement, decided they wanted to really pursue the commercial fisheries. They bought a
Yeah.
commercial 90-foot albacore boat, and they sailed around the world 11 months out of the year fishing for albacore. And so they left me back here at the house really to take care of the roads and the roof and all the things that really need attention on a farm. And because I had fallen in love over the course of those years growing this plant with my mom, my best friend and I decided that we were going to grow gardens together, and that's how we were going to make our living. And in the 90s, the price was 5,500 a pound. So if you grew 10 pounds or 20 pounds, as a kid, I guess I was a little bit older than that now. I was 24. It was really good money, and then you could live the rest of your summer, your winters, however you want, whether or not it was surfing or fishing, and it was a great way of life, or at least what I thought. And what we didn't understand is that there was a difference between state and federal rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had
Mm-hmm.
always grown up believing that if you had gotten busted for growing cannabis as a first time nonviolent offender, um, that it would just be probation. And if you got caught or in trouble for it in Humboldt County, maybe you decide at that point how to go forward with your life. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, it's not a whole lot of risk. I won't go to jail.
Yeah.
And kind of that was our mentality, as naive as it was. And unfortunately, we got turned in by a guy down our road, this 90-year-old man, which, happens. It's okay.
Yeah.
He was stuck in his ways. However it was. I'm not bitter towards him. And one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, I had 30 federal agents drive up my driveway, guns drawn, the whole shebang, and they served a search warrant. And they searched my property here, and they also searched this piece of property that my best friend and I were growing the cannabis on. And it just as a little bit of a clarification, we had known at that time that enforcement was bad. More and more helicopters were in the air doing aerial surveillance. So we planted a little bit different than we do now. We didn't plant out in the open where you could grow a 5 or 10 pound plant. We planted underneath the bushes, or we planted in trees on platforms. And it was this weird, sick, now looking back at it, cat and mouse game that we played with the cops, because we were growing a plant and they were trying to find it. And then they would go and cut it down, and then they would leave, and then we'd do it again next year. Right. That was the game. And when we got turned into some BLM agents, which were
Hmm.
making examples out of kids our age, and really wanted to send a message to the Emerald Triangle that, look, you can get in a lot of trouble for doing this. And when those federal agents showed up here, they searched the place and that other piece of property for 8 hours. Um, and then at the end of the day, they left by giving me a little yellow speeding ticket, and they walked away. And I was like, wow, that was really, really different than I thought. And I called a lawyer and I said, hey, this is what just happened. I'm like, am I in trouble, or did they just jack me and that was it? Or like, what happened? And he said, well, if it was the feds, they could have up to 5 years to charge you. And I was like, okay, well, and I'm going by what I've watched on movies and how things happen. And that was my expectations. And then it was really a year and 4 months to the day that they showed back up with an arrest warrant. And at that time, I knew what I was being charged with, and I was being charged federally for cultivation of marijuana. And um, because it was a federal charge, I was looking at what Ronald Reagan had put into place, what we call a mandatory minimum. And even for a first time nonviolent offender, my best friend and I were looking at 10 years to life in prison. And I was like, wow, that's like, for growing a plant, I just had a hard time believing that. And, my expectation was they're going to try to scare me with this big amount of time. They want me to rat on all my friends, or the big fish, or however they do it. And then if they can get me to rat, then, hopefully I would get probation or whatever. Or that was the thought, right?
Yeah.
And, I had a little bit different values than maybe some other folks did at that time. And, you know, it was always taught to me like these, the community was my family.
Yeah, man.
Um, sorry.
No.
It was, there was no way that I was ever going to tell on any of these people that I grew up on. This was, like I said, these were my family, and I could never look them in an eye ever again. And so, if you did the crime, you do the time. And so my best friend and I, we went to court for 3.5 years, and we stood up on sentencing day, where a federal judge that we tried to explain for 3 years who we were as people to really stood up and said, I would rather not give you any time at all, but because I'm bound by the law, I'm forced to give you the lower end of the mandatory minimum, which was 10 years. And so in federal prison, you do 85% of your time. And we did 8 years in jail. We got a little bit of time off for a drug program. So it kind of knocked it down to 8 years. And we both did about 8 years in jail, and then had 5 years probation. So from the time I got busted, from the time I actually got off probation, it was 17 years out of my life. And now, ironically, I'm permitted by by Humboldt County in the state of California, and now still doing the same thing legally, paying all my taxes and all the fees that they require, and now it's okay. So, and unfortunately, there's still 40 or 50,000 people in jail for growing cannabis and doing exactly what I was doing, and now it's legal. So it's kind of hard to, be participating, knowing how they must be feeling while they're in jail, looking at us going, well, like, what the F is happening out there? Like, are you going to let us out? I mean, so I feel for them. I try to work with the Last Prisoners Project as much as I can.
Yeah, man.
I don't know if it seems like it's falling on deaf ears, but um, unfortunately, getting back to your question, I'm surprised I even remembered it. Um, one of the hardest times for me while I was in jail, my mom passed away in a boating accident. And it was this community that really was there for me and got me through it because when you get that much time, it's really hard to know if you're ever getting out. Like I didn't go in jail going, oh, okay, when do I get out? It was so long away. It was 3,000 days. And when I came back out, after I'd lost my mom, and I drove up this driveway, and I still remember it to this day. And it goes back to the single best choice I ever made in my life was not to cooperate with the federal government on my friends. I had 50 people from this community here for me when I drove up my driveway. And these were the people that helped me get my life back in order. These were the people that brought me toothpaste and toothbrushes and silverware and plates. Everything that I had lost over that 3,000 days, they brought it back because just as I said I was who I was to them before I went in, they also wanted to respect that, and they respected that I didn't cooperate, and they really were there for me when I got out, and enabled me to keep going forward in a healthy way. So um, this community suffered with legalization and the downturn in the market and the oversaturation in the market, but the integrity of those people that still live here is still intact. And even through these trying times, we all still try to remain here for each other. And it's a tough time in the Emerald Triangle now. We watched the price of $5,500 pounds go down to $200 and $300 pounds, and
Mm.
this is a community that your listeners should understand that the state or the county didn't build. It was the cannabis growers that grew and reaped the rewards from illegal funds that built the schools in the hills, that built the technical rescue team, that built the fire departments. And so through those donations to those different organizations, we created this little secret society that was amazing for all of us to participate in. And now that there's not that kind of money around anymore, this infrastructure that we built is really suffering, and they're trying to find ways to survive. And sorry, that was a lot. And so with legalization, back to your original question, I wanted to honor my mom and grow a strain and breed strains here that was to an original strain that she grew with me. It was originally named Fruit Loops, and then it was called Paradise Punch later. And Paradise Punch was grown here mainly because it was an early harvesting strain. It was a blueberry, DJ blueberry crossed with the lab berry to a good friend of my mom's. They created a strain that was an early harvester, right? So it harvested September 1st, which was close to 3 weeks to a month before the main harvest happened
Yeah.
in Humboldt County. So we always got a little bit more for that because we beat the flood of the marketplace even back in the 80s and the 90s. So I'm not saying it was the best strain in the world. It was a little bit fluffier. It wasn't that rock hard OG bud that everybody seeks to find. But it made you feel amazing. It had an amazing terp profile, even though that's not how we talked back then, right? We used our nose, and the nose knows.
Yep.
And if
Yep.
it smelled good, looked good, and tasted good, and made you feel amazing, that was kind of your strain. And so moving forward in the legalized world now, I wanted to honor her, and all the strains we grow here are crossed to that original strain that I grew with my mom when I was 10. And
Wow.
so you get strains that we named like Mom's Weed or Sweet Marlene. My mom's name was Marlene. And we actually bred one to and created a strain for Rose's mom that had also passed away when she was 48. And we named it Margie's Magic after her mom, Margie. And so we want to do cool things. I got a tourism license, so we get to take tours and we get to share the story of the Emerald Triangle small farmer with people that come from all over the world. And for me, kind of that's what we want to do is really shine the light on what makes the Emerald Triangle farmer special. Why are we different than Big Ag? Um, and you won't hear many of us say we grow the best cannabis in the world, because for me, what makes me feel good might not make you feel good. So what we grow here might not be the strains for you. It's really the most important thing, and I say it quite often, is knowing your farmer and knowing how they cultivate is way more important than listening to a farmer say they grow the best weed in the world, because that statement, in my opinion, is false. A lot of us grow amazing weed, and it's really up to the consumer to figure out what makes them feel good and what terpene profile or cannabinoid profile makes them feel amazing. But it is important to know that how your farmer is cultivating the cannabis that you're about to put in your body. And there's amazing farmers out there like Moonmade Farms and Bryceland Forest Farms and Casey and Amber O'Neill with Happy Day Farms. And I'll leave, there's 50 or 100 of them that do it the right way, that grow regeneratively, that care about the environment. And I'm not mentioning half of them, but it is easy to seek those farmers out. And my any advice to your listeners is to punch in Google regenerative farmers of the Emerald Triangle, and it'll probably show you 50 of them. Soul Spirit Farms, White Thorn Valley Farms, Mattole Valley Farms. Like, I'm surrounded by amazing farmers that really are really shining the light on strains that they used to grow with their parents too. And my friend Canna Country Farms, Teddy, is another example of him shining the light on the strain that he grew with his mom, number 26, that hasn't really gotten the attention that White Thorn Rose has, because it is a little bit lower THC strain. A lot of times it's 16, 17%. And in today's California marketplace, they have always looked down on sun-grown that's not like 25 or 30% THC. So we're trying to educate at the same time as trying to survive, and it's a it's a it's a pretty big struggle for farmers like just Rose and I. Like, we don't have a sales team. We don't have
Yeah.
like an army to do the work. We're doing the work. And so same with Canna Country Farms and a lot of these small farmers. So supporting small farmers, I think, is for your listeners, which should be high on their list. It would be a shame if consumers had to rely strictly on corporate cannabis, weed, the Coors Light, the Bud Light. The variety and the spice of life are these legacy farmers and these legacy genetics that they get to experience. So there we came full circle to sharing our genetics is a big reason why we wanted to allow people to grow their own and grow something special that nobody else in the world is. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Which White Thorn Rose is definitely something special.
yeah. And
Um,
so White Thorn Rose was Paradise Punch, my mom's original Fruit Loop Paradise Punch thing that we talked about before. And I crossed that by happenstance with a strain given to me by a buddy of mine. He's still in the traditional market, if there is a traditional market, or however that works. He came down, he's, oh man, you got to try this. And he called it Lemon OG. Whatever it was it really Lemon OG? Was he just, who knows what it was? He
right.
called it Lemon OG, so I passed. I'm calling it Lemon OG. So Mom's Weed and White Thorn Rose are Paradise Punch crossed with Lemon OG. And with
Wow.
growing from seed, a lot of times you'll get a bunch of different phenos, right?
Yeah,
And
man.
when I
Yep.
grew from seed early on in the legalized market, we discovered a bunch of different phenos, and we kept Mom's Weed and White Thorn Rose around as staple cultivars to our farm because they were special. I really liked them. Rose really liked them. And and then all of a sudden, California Marketplace said, well, if you're calling it White Thorn Rose, and we want it to look like White Thorn Rose. So we had to kind of pivot from growing from seed, and we started growing from clone. So at least if you're calling it White Thorn Rose, it looked like it.
Yeah.
And I prefer, if possible, to grow from seed.
Yep,
And I do always have some seed plants around because it's fun and they're a little bit more hardy. It's just fun to grow from seed.
I agree.
But the marketplace, if you're putting it into jars, kind of pushes back currently with that kind of stuff. So
What goes into cultivating White Thorn Rose, and what do you think makes it so unique? I was talking to Brian about it, but I'd love to hear it
he probably
from
knows
you.
more about Brian probably knows more about White Thorn Rose than I do. At least the manufacturing part of it and how it reacts to certain things and all the different stuff. Um, because as I'm sure you discovered really quickly, Brian with the Bryantist, um, I work with him a lot because he's just like a good human
Dude,
being. And
pure
I,
soul.
having grown up in Humboldt County, and if I'm going to participate in the legalized marketplace or the traditional marketplace or however it is, I want to surround myself with by good people, right? People that
Yes,
look
sir.
out for you no matter what during the good times and the bad times. And really, for me, Brian is that kind of person. And so that's why together we try to, you know, run things across with each other. But White Thorn Rose, especially for our farm, um, was identified as a good hash strain early on by Bell from Heritage and Brian, who at one time worked with Heritage. They
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
worked with it more than anybody, and they discovered and they said, "Hey, look, it checks all the boxes. It's a great yielder. It's really unique to the marketplace, and we believe it's a winner." And those guys together really brought it to like the Emerald Cup and won so many different awards with it. Just reinstilled in me, wow, well, maybe we do have something special. And for me as a farmer, what made it really special to grow, I mean, it's really easy to grow. It's not really leafy. Um, I plant it mid-June, 1st of June to mid-June, and it harvests really early, like June 15th, or excuse me, September 15th. So it's really about a 4-month growing season, besides all the time before and all the time after that it takes to actually finish the growing season. But I can take less risk, right? So a lot of times Humboldt County gets early storms mid-September, and if all my crop is basically harvested and out, you know, a lot of times I can avoid having a lot of damage by mold or just what comes with these big giant storms that comes through Humboldt County. And so it's really beneficial in the same way Paradise Punch is for our farm. Is it shortens up the growing season, and it's something amazing that people like. And I do stick a certain amount, maybe 20 or 30 pounds in my jar, because people don't only like smoking the hash form of White Thorn Rose, but it also resonates and makes people feel amazing with the flower form. So I stick about 20 or 30 pounds in my jar a year, which I get a lot less for than if I were to sell it by hash. But because it's not about, you know, so much about the money, it's about really just providing to the consumer something that I believe is amazing, and they're also finding is something pretty special too.
Do you see the challenge at all keeping up with the consumer and what they want and balancing the quality of what you want?
You know, the quality is really up to me, and as much as I hate saying the word SOP, right? Like that's not in my arsenal of thing, because
Yep, I get it.
I would rather say, you know, the success of our crop is really determined by the amount of TLC that we give to the plant. And you know, I was taught from an early age from my mom is that every cultivar needs something different. So if we're growing 4 cultivars on our land here or on our permitted site, it's not like I can say, hey, on Wednesday, it's time to fertilize, dump that thing in the tank. And it's really about having so much experience with the different cultivars that you kind of, it's like raising a kid. You know when they're crying, if they're hungry, or if they're, you know, they need to go to the bathroom, or if they need their diaper change. You get so tuned in with certain cultivars after having grown them for that long that you kind of know what they need, and we can stand at the bottom of our property, look up on the hill and go, oh, that one might need a little water, or maybe that one's it's time to feed. And our feeding regimen is more so top dressing. I prefer to use dry amendments like Bakwano or Dr. Earth 444, or maybe teas made from compost that I've collected, or mulch that I've collected around the farm, because I always want the cannabis that we grow here to taste like the place that it's grown in, right? I think
Nice,
that's
man.
what makes Huckleberry Hill um, flower unique, is that it kind of tastes like its surroundings, like the forest around it. And that sounds a little wooey, a little bit weird, but it kind of takes on that flavor. And I put compost and mulch from around the property in our beds or in our pots or whatever we're growing in. So I think it does take on that flavor a little bit. And um, yeah, I forgot where we were headed with that, but
That carried it well. That carried it well.
yeah, so I
Something.
don't know if there's an SOP. I think that they all need their different attention, and the more tender, loving care that you give the cultivars, kind of besides a weird weather year or something, it usually kind of comes out similar every year. And the weather also dictates on a year that might be better for the flower or better for the hash versus um, vice versa. So last year I think was a pretty good year overall. I thought it was going to probably one of the best harvesting years that I ever remember in Humboldt County, and that's like in
Wow.
50 years. Um,
Wow. And
I
what made it
don't
so
know.
special?
It was just those hot ending. So usually we get a rain in early September, and a lot of times those flowers are formed, and a lot of times that will begin like mold spores to
Yep.
start to sprout.
Yep.
This year, or last year, uniquely, we received what I call that same early September rain. We got it like in the third week of August. So the flower formation on the
Nice.
plants were so early that it didn't bother them at all. It didn't start that mold process. And then all of September and even into October, it was really nice dry weather, and just there was no mold issues. Everything was just formed up nice and finished nice. And yeah, it was just a great year. I don't know if it was the greatest of year for yielding for
Yeah.
hash. It
Yeah.
seemed like the White Thorn Rose. Sometimes it's between a 5 and a 6% yielder, which always benefits those manufacturers.
Oh
This
yeah.
year, it seemed lower. It seemed better, terpene profile. Maybe the
Hmm.
flavor was as good, if not better, than some other years. But the yield was on between a 4 and a 5 this year versus a 5 and a 6.
And
So
what about like yield per weight then? How was your per weight compared to previous years?
this
Kind of
was
the
like
same?
it's really hard to judge that, more so because we pivoted this last year. There was such a demand for the fresh frozen of the White Thorn Rose. We grew like 90% of our farm was fresh frozen. I even had a really good friend of mine grow his whole farm White Thorn Rose. So what
Nice,
White
man.
Thorn Rose and its popularity or its demand has given to me is that ability to not grow more and do more. That's not the goal. The goal is how, like going back to what I said, it's never going to be about one of us, and it's always going to be about all of us. So moving forward, it's not how can Huckleberry Hill Farms survive this legalization regulatory system. It's how can we all do it. And kind of seemed there for a minute that incorporating other farms to grow what you have now created that has a huge demand was a pathway forward. And so I did have a few of my other farmer friends grow White Thorn Rose, and some of our other cultivars that iPoppy and My Green Network really are demanding. And as we enter into new things, we also learn new things. And we did discover that just because it's White Thorn Rose doesn't mean it's always going to taste exactly the same as the flower that was grown here at Huckleberry. Each different little microclimate or different technique that people have in the way they do things definitely changes those terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles. And there is a different taste to White Thorn Rose grown at different places, and maybe some of those weren't as desired as what was grown here. And so we're trying to navigate that and trying to figure out how can we produce something that's consistently good, so when the consumer goes to the marketplace to buy it, it tastes like what they're hoping or they're hearing about, and they're not disappointed. And so I don't know if we have that solution yet. We did scale back on the amount that we're growing. I'm growing all White Thorn Rose, and one of my buddies is, but not the other two farms that I had doing it. So
Did you ever take samples of each location's soil to compare it to see what
yeah,
is coming in your field to other fields?
yeah, they all grew similar. That we kind of all used similar inputs. Maybe the SOPs, if I use that word, when it came to harvesting,
Or different,
we all
yeah.
had a different technique, and that did ultimately, at the end of the day, I think, affect the quality of the hash that was being manufactured. Um, and farmers are pretty hard headed, right? It's
Oh yeah.
people are set in their ways, and so it's hard for me to tell somebody I grew with for 50 years, hey, you got to do it my way now. They're like, what are you talking? I'll grow it my way, and yeah, that's how I do
Well,
it.
settle
So
down, Johnny. It's probably what they're saying. Settle down, John.
yeah, exactly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so anyways, it's always a learning process. Even after doing the same thing for 50 years, we're still learning every year. And part of what's made Emerald Triangle farmers um, maybe a little bit different or a little bit cut above the rest is the sharing of information amongst really good friends, right? Like if I make a mistake growing certain cultivars, I can share that with Ridgeline Farms, and maybe you won't have to make the same mistake. And we kind of share information back and forth. And so that's been really beneficial to a lot of us here.
Yeah. So one thing that I would like to compare is you're such a seasoned grower throughout all the generations and have a really good understanding. And the newer generations were creating this competitive aspect to cannabis, right? And I feel like you and I resonate on the same page of community over competition. So I read something and I want to read this little paragraph that you said in a different interview because it really stuck out to me. And what I think it was you talking about the difference in generations with growing. And you said the more conservative groups like my parents really didn't like seeing their children of their generation seeing the effect that it had on us. And at the point, it just became so addictive, like growing the plants and breeding them for our own strains, that there is no stopping us, right? And then you were saying that that kind of level of competition elevated each other and then created this catastrophe that happened with Humboldt County and everybody coming in. So what do you think about the competitive scene that we relate to cannabis and all the different egos that go along with it? Is it a good progression? Do we think we're losing touch with how we're doing it? Um, and just a little reflection on that because it really stuck out to me, man, what you said there.
Yeah, and I think it means a little bit different when I said when I was reflecting back when we were growing up, to really what it means for me now. And when I was growing up, that competitive edge, whether or not it was playing football, in that desire to win, even in a friendly way, was similar to growing up, growing cannabis, with my best friend, looking at all my other best friends growing, and it was this weird little competition. Well, how many pounds did you grow? 10 this year, or did you grow 15? And we were hiking sometimes a mile or two out into the woods, so it was a lot of work. And as a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, to have those kind of values where you really looked forward to getting up and working, because it didn't feel like work, right? It was
Yeah.
like I knew my buddies down the road were up in, packing soil out into the mountains, and we wanted to do the same thing, because at the end of the year, that comparison of, hey, I made 20 pounds, how'd you do? And even though it was a friendly, competitive way, today's world, it's about how much are you making, um, not only in quantity of flour, but also money. Everything's kind of judged by how much money you're making with the success. And for me, and a lot of my friends, it's really about those relationships that we're building with even yourself or with other consumers or people that are now growing our genetics. That's the reason why we're doing what we're doing. So I'm really not competing with anybody anymore. I don't think. I'm just my biggest goal is to like bring a smile to somebody's face. And I'm 58 years old now, and like my mom died when she was 50. Rose's mom died when she was 48. And I think a big mistake, and I always try to keep this in perspective, is that we sometimes take things for granted, right? Like that I'm going to be around here tomorrow. And so whatever I can do today to make a difference in somebody's life that's where I get those little small moments of joy, is when somebody shares some flower that they're growing of a strain that I created with my mom, and they show me a picture of it and they're so happy. Or even as far as last night, there was this guy that maybe, and just to use Instagram as an example, had, you know, maybe 25 followers, and I saw him on a live cooking something, and he had bought my seeds. And so I requested to jump on a live with him, which seemed like it made his night for whatever reason, that I would take the time sitting in my living room on the same couch to talk to him and just say, hey, look, I appreciate you. I appreciate you buying our seeds. And I think as a culture, and with just everything that's going on in the world, like we've sped up so much and put money as a priority, that we've lost touch with just being nice for just being nice and not wanting anything into return. And kind of that's what cannabis and growing your own magic and giving seeds and providing cannabis that has a story has given for me and Rose. It's more than just about money, and it's about you and me. It's about this friendship, for the first time being on a podcast with you, that hopefully can develop into something. Who knows where it goes or what it is, and maybe it's just this or whatever. It's about being nice to you because you're nice to me, and that's it.
Yeah,
And
man.
I know that sounds a little weird, but
No,
um
no, the problem
right.
is people think that might sound weird and it's not. That's
Yeah.
just how it should be, and we need to adapt that universally.
Yeah.
Um,
So when I take tours, part of, the stories that I tell here is really trying to live every day to its fullest and not taking tomorrow for granted, because, I having lost my parents so early, and Rose have lost their parents so early. It's some of the stories that we tell here, and it's always surrounded about, more about the Emerald Triangle small farmers, than about Huckleberry Hill, and people that have visited that have unique stories that affected, the reason why we're here today. And um, some of the stories we tell, I watch people on the side of the mountainside just like break down and cry. Or Rose does like a 5 or 10 minute sound healing at the top of the hill. And during that time, emotionally, those people break down and they cry. And those are people that we just met for like less than an hour or 2 hours. And that experience of sharing your emotion really brings you close together. And they're forever part of our farm, and stories that we tell. And they reach out to us all the time. And it's really cool to watch that transformation and being able to tell our story to people that I've never met before. It's unless you come here and experience it, it's really hard to explain how that actually truly feels. But it's a real powerful moment. It's really cool.
yeah, no, I'm grateful that we have individuals like you and Rose to carry that torch of beacon of hope to just show what cannabis is really about. Because I feel like that's not something that's adapted everywhere when it comes to this space, especially when we get into the bigger battles in legal areas with the MSOs versus the independents and everything like that. And that's where we're losing the consciousness of what the plant's connected to. So we need the farmers like yourself to really, unfortunately put it on their shoulders to keep that legacy going, which is important.
Yeah, Teddy from Canna Country Farms, and he's about a mile down the road, and so like already talked to him today. I talked to Ridgeline. All the farmers, we call each other every day and check in, and especially with the some of the challenges in the marketplace. And we've done quite a few documentaries together and done videos and throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks, what's working, what's not working. How do we educate people? How do we share um, this small little piece of the world with the world? And he said something in one of the documentaries that kind of stuck with me, and we all run around stealing each other's little verbiage from time to time, but he said, I want my farm just to be a reflection of me being me and what I like and what I want to share with you. And I'm not going to give into growing these commercialized strains because they're rock hard OG buds that I can maybe get the most for. But this is something a little bit looser, something a little bit, visually doesn't look like this perfect red apple that you might buy in the
Yep.
store. That but my stuff really is a reflection of that flawed organic apple that's going to taste amazing and it's going to make you feel amazing. And yeah, I think that's kind of consistent with a lot of us small farmers up here. Is we just want, for the first time in our life, to share what we've been doing. So
Yeah.
it's a really cool experience to have been in hiding for 50 years and now for the first time sharing what you've put so much passion and love into. It's a cool moment, and it's as simple as people reaching out on Instagram at maybe 5 in the morning saying, "Man, that stuff made me feel amazing. I've had this ailment for so long, and White Thorn Rose is something that gave me some kind of relief." It's something as simple as that is the reason why we do what we do now.
Yeah, man. And I think if anybody has a chance to kind of get some medicine that came out from your farm, they have a piece of you attached to it. And I think that goes hand in hand with their relief. I think there's definitely some type of spiritual connection to this plant, especially when we put ourselves into it. And I think people experience that when you then gift it to them, and they can experience it as well.
Yeah, I think, as people start to know our story and feel our passion, it reminds me a lot of when like buddies of mine used to roll a joint, back in the 80s. Like sometimes it would take them 10 or 15 minutes to roll a joint because the whole time they were rolling that joint, they were telling the story of where this flower came from,
Yep.
what creek or what canyon they had to hike up with the 50 pounds of dolomite, and like how many times they had to evade some kind of eradication and sneak it off the hill and dry it, and how you hear the whole story of how it happened, and you're like, come on, let's just smoke the joint already. But they're so passionate about what they do. Like part of the fun is really sharing that story, and I think a lot of times that's why people that know our story, they support us and they buy our product from the retail stores, is because they understand what we went through and they want to share that story with people they're about to smoke the joint with, because
Yeah.
that's half of the fun. And growing your own, is they're telling that story while their buddies smoking their weed. It's really the true magic.
Yeah, man. It is there's something wild about just sharing a joint with somebody and that connection you make. I mean, some of my best friends now are people that I just met and we shared a joint. And those relationships have just, kept on with the years, and here we are today. It's really cool, cannabis and what it
Yeah.
does for people and the connections that we make through it, Just like this right now. It's
Yeah,
uh
100%.
it's wild. So you mentioned the whole tourist aspect. Is there a way, how do people get involved with that? Do you select people to come? Can they get in touch with you to come tour the farm? How's that work?
We've been giving tours basically like once a month with this this educational group called the Ganjier program.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and then we also work with Humboldt Cannabis Tours, Matt Kirsch. Every county in every state and every city in every county, the state allowed them to make up their own rules and regulations. So California's really screwed up. So other states should learn from us and not do it this way. And so there's so many different rules and regulations in every different county and every different city, that Humboldt County decided that they wouldn't allow anybody to come to a farm unless they had a permitted, unless they were a permitted, and unless there was a tourism guide that has a permit. And there was only one in Humboldt County, and that was Max Kirsch with Humboldt Cannabis Tours. So besides him and in the Ganjier program, really you have to go through them, and they have a website. You can always, he has the available dates. Like I said before, if it's, it's just Rose and I here. So this, I would love to give tours every single day, but it's Rose and I growing the weed. So I got to leave a little time to grow the weed, or else it's the weed that actually ends up suffering. So Matt has kind of a schedule that we've kind of given to him, and he kind of schedules people in and out. But we, if that's a problem, we can always make kind of special arrangements. You can DM Rose or myself, and we always want to make time for people.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
the Ganjier program, just to concentrate that, because I'm very familiar with it, but for our audience that's not. So this is a like a certification program that individuals can sign up for, and they go through different types of levels of classes. It teaches you about cannabis cultivation, terpenes, and from what I believe, they then have to come out to a farm and they get tested on strains as well as they go through this process. Does that kind of encapsulate what the
Yeah,
Ganjier
I
is?
mean, they're just a wealth of knowledge. They put together a team with, people like Amanda Ryman, who has her doctorate, Kevin Jordry, Nick T, who's like a
Yep.
world-renowned hash maker.
Yep.
So they kind of hand pick some of the people that have been in the industry for a long time and are very knowledgeable in their fields. And they do give a pretty rigorous test where not everybody passes. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, kind of what separates you from the rest of the cannabis people that are in the industry is you can take that certification that you could get at the end of that class, and you can, go to a retail store and say, hey, look, when a consumer comes in, I have the knowledge to be able to talk about terpenes or cannabinoids, or why one person should choose a different flower over another flower. And so I think it's just a really super cool program. The industry in a whole, especially in California, is kind of suffering now. So their attendance is, there's a lot of availability. So, like, if you're ever thinking about it, I think it's a good time. And they do take you to either our farm or Fallen Oaks, which is over in Salmon Creek, really close to the campus there. Um, Either farm you go to is a great experience. And really you get to touch and feel the plants and interact and ask whatever questions you have. And the different instructors there will give a little tutorial while they're here about their different fields of their expertise. So it's really super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an awesome program. My man Johnny, any final thoughts or messages you want to share with the Terp Trends audience?
You know, um, First of all, I appreciate you listening to Adam and Terp Trends, and it shows you're going down and you're being educated by the right folks. Second of all, know your farmer. Google whatever farms you're interested. Um, and then really grow your own if possible. If your state or your county or your city allows you to grow your own, I think it's the most magical connective thing you could possibly do. We do sell seeds at tangledrootstore.com. And it's not just our seeds here. You'll be able to get Ridgeline or Canna Country or Cow Legacy Farms, Mendo Dope Boys, if you've ever heard of them. People that have been in the game that want to share their family genetics that can only be found one place in the world. So, um, veer away from the Gush Mints and the gelatos and all that. You can get those anywhere, and really grow your own magic is the most important thing I could encourage your listeners to do.
Awesome. And one final thing, if you could think of maybe two guests that I should seek out to have on here, who do you think that should be?
Let's pick a guy and a girl. And if we're going to pick small farmers, and if we're talking, I think my best advice would be small farmers. I
Yeah,
think
man.
you need to. you need to talk to Ridgeline Farms.
All right.
He's another farmer that I talk to every day that probably has as many, if not more, awards than I do. He's well known for a strain called Lance. And then I also think Moonmaid Farms. She's a regenerative farmer on the east side of Humboldt County that is really passionate about dried flower and is really a wealth of knowledge and really passionate about what she does.
Awesome. I'm
Yep.
excited. I'll see
Yep.
if I
And
can
if
get in
you,
touch with
I
them.
can, I can, I can definitely give you their contacts after
Yeah,
we're
man.
done here. And so, uh,
Yeah.
anyways, really
Perfect.
appreciate you
Well,
taking the time, Adam. And thanks to all your listeners. And please follow us on Instagram. We're at Huckleberry Hill Farms _ WTR. Lost our other account, but or Rose R _O_W_Z. Um, yeah, you hit us up if you're ever in the area. Come by the farm or whatever. Appreciate
yeah.
it.
Yeah, man. And I'll tag all the socials so everyone gets a clear just link to it all. Awesome. Johnny, just
You
give
got
it
it.
1 second.